So it's lesson 8 and we're working. I'm going to load my app again. We haven't actually built a way to log out right now. So we've seen that we can register both with email as well as with Google. So what I might actually need to do, because we have no way to log out, I'm already signed in. Well, we'll see if I rebuild the app, it should sign me out. How would we take the user off to the main activity once they sign in? Either sign up or sign in. Like we said, you got it to work? Okay, so it actually does both, right? Because, well, we'll try it. So if our result is okay, we're going to get the current user, and then we'll redirect to main activity. Okay, so Michael, you want to tell me exactly how you did it? Yep. So we'll use an intent to redirect the user after they sign in. So we'll restart. Should ask us, that should kill our login by restarting the app with changes. So now I should be able to log in with either provider. Either I could use my email and password, or I could use my Google account. I'll try my email and password, and I should get redirected off. Okay, looks like I'm still signed in. Ah, good point. Thank you. Nice catch. Thank you for that. We'll restart it. Okay, so it actually signed me and I'm still signed in with Google. So as soon as I loaded it, it took me to main activity. Didn't even have to sign in. Really, to test this, we need to add sign out to kind of test it properly. Mike? Okay, you know what? I'm going to do that. I assume That should be somewhere in my settings. Yep. Yep. Got it. Thank you. That's great. So if this way, I don't want Google to just automatically sign me in all the time. Yeah, it might be convenient for users, but for now, it's caused me a bit of grief. Got it. But because I had signed in with Google. Well, we'll add sign out as well, and then we have the option to put it back if we want. So this is totally optional for our purposes for now. I like Mike's suggestion that I'm going to disable that. Okay, so now it takes me back out. So now when I sign in, actually, let's see what happens first if I put in an invalid credential. I don't think we've really handled this. Actually, this is going to sign me up. Sorry. Let me go back. I'll put in an invalid password. Now notice it's smart enough. The first time I put in an email address, it just takes me to the register page, asks me for my first name, last word, and password. First name, last name, and password. Because it already recognizes this email address as valid, it now asks for the password. So if I put in an invalid password, it actually just validates. So I don't have to write any of the code that's baked into this Firebase Auth UI we created. Again, we could custom write the whole login screen, but then we'll have to use a toast message or something to tell the user if their login is invalid. And if I put in a valid one, it now should direct me. So now it takes me off to main activity, where I still can't log out. I'm still stuck here. Now, I think if I close the app, it will log me out. The Google Smart Lock wasn't logging me out, but I think if I actually close my emulator, it will log me out. So let's add, for now, we'll add it to our main activity. Next week, we'll look at navigation. So we may add a little navigation menu here that would include logout. But for now, the floating action button is pretty convenient. So let's put a floating action button on here. So let's go to our main activity. We'll actually have to go, actually, I got a lot of stuff open here. I can close a bunch of stuff. Just keep open what we need. So I want to open up the main activity layout. And let's add actually, let's maybe do it. I'll maybe do it through the designer. So notice when I started typing, it didn't recognize floating action button. And the reason is you can see in the designer, you can see there's a little download, meaning this is in another library that our project doesn't currently have. So if I add a floating action button, it should prompt me. So it actually wants to know when I do this. It actually wants an icon. And I've given you a link to the icon we want. Let's just look here. I don't know if there's an exit or a sign out icon in here. But if not, I've linked to one that we can use. Okay, hang on. We'll cancel that for a second. We'll come back to this. Let's grab the exit icon. So we'll put our floating action button on in a minute. So if you go back to Blackboard, the material design palette has an exit app icon. So if you click this link, it's going to take us here. So it goes to the material.io domain. And here's the exit app icon. So we want to use this icon on our floating action button. So let's download this file and then we can add it to our project as a resource. And then we can point our floating action button to use this icon. So I'm going to download it. I'll just save the SVG version. It's a vector graphic, so it's scalable. I'll just save it to my downloads folder first, and then we'll add this to our project through Android Studio. So in here, we have a drawable folder. So this is where our launcher icon is, for example, if we want to replace it. So I'm going to add a new, click on File, New, and I'm going to choose Image Asset. And then I'll browse to that SVG file we just downloaded. So in here, under the path, I'll just browse. And pick that file we downloaded. So here's our exit to app 24 pixel SVG. So I'll just click on that. I'm going to give it a name of IC, which stands for icon, IC exit. We'll try it like this. We may have to play around with it a bit. So it now adds two XML versions under drawable, a foreground and a background. So we'll see if we can now create a floating action button and include this icon on our button. So now I'll add my floating action button. And now if I pick on project, let's see if it's, so here's our exit button. We want our IC exit. We can also change the color if we want the black to become white. We can actually go into that XML file and we can modify the color in there. So I'll pick that under my drawable. So it wants to link to the material plus library. So we'll say yes. Where did my floating action button go? Oh, it's, so it's got to do a sync. Our button's still not here. We'll give it a minute. We may have to try. So now the dependency's here. So our button shows up. It's anchored. Right now it sits up at the top left. We'll anchor it maybe right down to the bottom right. It's typically where we expect to see the floating action button. And by default, it uses our accent color. So it's that bright pink. So we'll maybe want to play around with it a little bit. So I'll go into the text. We'll give it it's got an ID already. A floating action button. We can just leave it. Actually, I'll change that. I'll change it, give it an ID of fab exit. And we'll set the end to the end of our parent and the bottom to the bottom of our parent. So we want to anchor it, if we can, down there. So I didn't set a left or top, I just set an end and a bottom. We'll want to play around with it a little bit in terms of the style, but we can run it and at least see what this looks like. So I'll just restart. I'm still logged in. Well, actually, I'm not sure if my login is going to persist or not. I'm logged in with email and password, not Google. We'll see. Just while this runs. So you can see all the icons available in the material palette. There's tons of them here. And Google encourages us to use this because they want kind of a general consistency of look and feel of what an Android app is supposed to, how it's supposed to look. We may have wanted this one instead, but we can probably play with it. So I'll restart the app. So it does cancel my login, doesn't persist. So I'll log in again. So it takes us to our main activity. Here's our, probably needs a little bit of work. There's our floating action button. So what we want to do is we want to have the users log in. We want to let the user sign out. And then we want to take them back to our sign-in activity. So this is easy enough to do. We'll play around with the UI of it in a bit. So now on our main activity, down after our button save, just want to make sure I'm doing it. So we can set an on-click listener for our floating action button. So first, we call get instance on auth UI. And then we just call sign out. So that ends the user session. We have to resolve the reference. So Priyank, how are we going to do it? How do I automatically get the import? Right, so just double click it and alt enter. References our auth UI class. And then once this is done, we want to use an intent to take them back to the sign-in. So we can add an on-complete listener. So in here, We'll create a new intent object and we'll start the activity. So let's run this and see if our logout works. Put it over here so you can see the code. Now, we don't actually have any check on main activity. Right now, there's really no way for a user to get there without signing in. But once this is working, we probably also want to add some code to the top of the activity in case the user signs out and then clicks back. Whenever that activity is activated, we should be checking that there is a logged in user. And if not, let's redirect them back to sign in. Now we can sign in. And now we should be able to okay, let's see what happened. We got no error. Oh, whoops. Would help if I didn't call the on canceled listener, but put it on the on complete listener. Very disappointed in your debugging skills. So we don't have a canceled listener here. We want use an on complete listener. Okay, we'll try it again. So I'll sign in and then try signing out. Okay. So it takes me back and I'm signed out. I should probably try this with my Google login as well. So I'm signed in with Google. And now I'm back out and redirected to sign in. So we should be checking, however, we should be checking on main activity that the user is signed in. right? Because I've signed out, but I can go back and I'm here. Now, we need to think about for a minute, think carefully about when we should do this. And here's why. So let's go here. Sorry, this isn't the one. So if we keep in mind the activity life cycle, on which event in our main activity should we be validating that the user is logged in? Because when an activity loads for the first time, keep in mind, that's a different event potentially, or a different scenario than if the users clicked sign out and then they use the back button on the device to reload the activity. Mike, what do you think? Right, because if we do it on create, it's created the first time when they log in and we generate it, but on create isn't called again. So if we put this code, we'll maybe try it on create first, but we should see that that doesn't fully solve our problem. So we're going to need that check to go on start. It's about to be super busy in here. They said they're expecting about 900 people today in this building. Okay, so we'll put the check first in on create, but I think Mike is right. Based on that activity lifecycle, it's probably got to go in the on start, because on create only happens once, and on start happens anytime that activity is visible. So in here, we can check for authenticated user. So we'll call Firebase auth.getInstance.getUser. Sorry, current user. If nobody is logged in, this will return a null. So what should we do if there's no user here? Yeah, so the same thing we've done on sign out. In fact, we'll create the intent. We could probably create this as a function and just call the function, or we can run the same code. So let's see if this works. So I'm signed out right now. So I'm going to sign in, sign out, and then click the back button on my device. Okay, so here's main. So I'm going to sign out, which will take me back to sign in. But now if I go back, my auth check isn't running. I can still get here even after I've signed out. So I'm going to follow Mike's suggestion. We want to move this, I think, into on start. Because on start is being called when I click back, on create isn't being called. So I'm going to cut that out of here. So after we call on start, let's move our auth check in here. Because on start should get called anytime this activity comes to the top of the stack. So I'm going to sign in. Okay, so I'll sign out. And now I'm going to go back. So I can no longer use the back button. Thank you, Mike, for the suggestion. Good solution. So there is no way to get to main activity now if there's not a currently authenticated user. It will sign me out. It will continually redirect me back, even if we use the back stack and we're not creating activity. Does anybody have any questions before we take a break? Think what we'll do when we come back, we'll do a couple things with this. We'll maybe fix up the UI in our floating action button. Doesn't look very good. And we can actually look at this auth UI also includes some information about the user's profile. So we could create a bit of a profile page that can use that auth UI class so we can actually see the user's profile. So we can play around with that a little bit as well. I was going to give you a lab, but I'm not going to. I've decided against it. So I'm going to junk that. Okay, I'm going to run and get a coffee. I will be back as fast as I possibly can manage to do that.